Margaret Lawson, 74, had woven her life into the very walls of her Victorian home on Maplewood Street in suburban California. She and her late husband, Daniel, had bought the fixer-upper in the spring of 1980, its chipped green shutters and patchy lawn a canvas for their modest dreams. For 16 years, they'd poured sweat, laughter, and love into the house, painting walls a soft cream, planting a garden of rosemary and daisies, raising their only daughter, Sophie, in a home filled with warmth. The creaky oak floors bore the marks of Sophie's toddling steps, the kitchen windows carried the scent of homemade shortbread, and the living room echoed with Daniel's off-key humming of old country tunes. When Daniel fell ill in 2005, the house became his sanctuary. Margaret turned the den into a bedroom, spoon-feeding him soup through sleepless nights until he slipped away in 2006, his hand in hers. 5 years after Margaret stayed, the house a quiet shrine to their life, its corners whispering Daniel's presence in the rattle of windows or the creak of a floorboard. When Sophie, now a polished lawyer in her early 40s, suggested Margaret move into her and her husband Andrew's sleek suburban home, Margaret saw it as a chance to rebuild family ties. She packed her memories into cardboard boxes, leaving the deed in her name, a tether to the past she wasn't ready to sever. At first, Sophie's welcome felt genuine. A cup of tea, Andrew's help with her bookshelves, laughter over dinner. But the warmth faded, replaced by rules that shrank Margaret's presence. "No garlic, Mom, it lingers," Sophie would say. "No frying during the week, it makes the house greasy." Then came curfews, stay in your room after 9 for our routine. Margaret complied, folding her slippers by the door, lowering her TV to a whisper, sweeping crumbs twice over. She told herself these were compromises, not sacrifices, but the rules multiplied. No guests, no laundry outside, no garden pots to clutter Sophie's aesthetic. Margaret, once the heart of her home, felt like a tenant on borrowed time. On a Saturday afternoon, California's golden sun bathed Sophie's backyard in picture-perfect light. The air hummed with jasmine and grilled salmon, wine glasses clinking as Sophie hosted colleagues from her law firm, Andrew's golf buddies, and yoga studio friends. She stood at the patio center, cocktail in hand, her laugh sharp, her gestures wide, as if proving her place in this curated world. Margaret, in a flour-dusted apron, stayed in the kitchen, her domain of quiet purpose. She pulled a tray of shortbread cookies from the oven, their buttery warmth a recipe her mother taught her decades ago, when Sophie was a giggling child stealing dough. Arranging them on a silver platter, Margaret straightened her shoulders, summoning the grace of the dinners she'd hosted with Daniel. She stepped onto the patio, heart hopeful. "Cookies, everyone," she said softly. A few guests took one. A yoga friend murmured, "Delicious." For a fleeting moment, Margaret thought she might belong. Then Sophie tilted her glass, chuckling, "Oh, she just kind of stays here." The words, tossed like crumbs, landed like stones. Nervous laughter rippled. Some guests stared into their drinks, others averted their eyes. Andrew, leaning against a patio table, offered a tight smile before looking away, his silence a familiar armor. Margaret's hands trembled under the tray's weight, but she forced a weak smile, her cheeks burning. She retreated to the kitchen, washing glasses, scraping plates, polishing counters until they gleamed. The routine swallowed her hurt, but the wound lingered. As Sophie's heels clicked upstairs and Andrew mumbled, "Thanks, Margaret," she realized she'd been reduced, not mom, not mother-in-law, just Margaret, a guest in her own family. 3 days later, a Monday morning's quiet pressed down on the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed, the clock above the sink ticked relentlessly. Margaret reached for her favorite mug, its faded blue flowers a relic of happier times, but her hand brushed a glass on the drying rack. It fell, shattering on the tile with a crash that echoed like a gunshot. "Damn it," she whispered, kneeling to gather the shards, their edges biting her fingers. Her hip ached as she moved, a reminder of years spent standing, caring, enduring. Sophie's heels struck the floor like gunfire as she stormed in, eyes narrowing at the mess. "What did you do now?" she barked, her voice tight with irritation. "I'm so sorry," Margaret stammered, still crouched. "It was an accident." Sophie's hand sliced the air. "Stop. Just stop. You should know your place. Don't think you have a right to be here." Margaret's throat tightened, her fingers pausing on a shard. "Sophie, I'm your mother." Sophie's lips curled into a sneer. "You think that matters? This is my home." "It's mine too," Margaret said, her voice soft but steady. "I planted the garden. I built this with your father." Sophie laughed, cold and sharp, pulling her phone from her pocket. "You think you're entitled just because you're old? You think cleaning crumbs makes you useful? Get out, or I'll call the cops." The dial tone pierced Margaret's shock. "Yes, I need to file a trespassing report," Sophie said into the phone, her voice calm, deliberate. Margaret didn't wait to hear more. Barefoot, she stumbled out the back door, the patio stones cold against her feet. The rosemary and daisies she'd planted swayed in the breeze, indifferent to her exile. Under the relentless California sun, something inside her broke, a fragile hope, and something else awoke, a resolve she hadn't felt in years. That night, in the guest room's narrow bed, Margaret lay awake, the ceiling fan spinning above like a slow metronome. Sophie's threat echoed, but memories surged stronger. She saw 1980, when she and Daniel bought the Maplewood house, its patchy lawn and peeling paint a promise of their future. They'd skipped honeymoons, saved every penny from Daniel's auto plant shifts and her library work. They painted walls together, Daniel humming, Sophie dancing on drop cloths, her pigtails bouncing. The house held their life. Homemade curtains, Halloween costumes stitched at the dining table, dinners on the porch as the sun sank. When Daniel fell ill, Margaret turned the den into his bedroom, nursing him through pain until his final breath. She'd stayed 5 years after, the house a living memory, its windows rattling like Daniel's songs. When Sophie suggested moving in, Margaret hoped for closeness, but found rules instead. She'd overheard Sophie one night, whispering to Andrew, "She's emotional clutter." At a dinner, Sophie claimed Margaret's roast chicken as her own, calling her a freeloader to uneasy laughter. Then came the demand to sign over the house for paperwork. "It's just for taxes, Mom," Sophie said, her smile tight. Margaret refused, sensing deceit. A bank call revealed the truth. Sophie had forged a mortgage application, claiming ownership, listing Margaret as an elderly dependent. Confronted, Sophie sneered, "You don't contribute. You take up space." At 3 a.m., Margaret rose, moving silently to avoid creaking floorboards. She packed a suitcase, 2 outfits, her wallet, Daniel's wedding photo, his death certificate, the house deed, and left a note under Sophie's untouched teapot. "I don't hate you, but I won't beg for space in a home I built." She walked into the cool night, jasmine and asphalt in the air, her suitcase rolling behind her. At a roadside motel, the bleach-scented sheets and flickering TV commercials felt like freedom. She slept fitfully, but with a clarity she hadn't known in years. The next morning, she visited Henry Walters, Daniel's oldest friend and a retired attorney. His bungalow, surrounded by citrus trees, smelled of lemons. "Margaret, you look like hell," he said, his gray hair wild. She laughed, the sound surprising her. "I need your help." Over coffee at his cluttered kitchen table, she spread out the deed, tax receipts, and marriage certificate. Henry's eyes scanned the papers. "She can't touch this. The house is yours, every inch." "I want to sell it," Margaret said, her voice steady. Henry raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "Never been surer." He recommended Clara, a realtor and former library patron Margaret remembered as a quiet child reading in corners. Clara's office was bright, her smile warm with recognition. "Mrs. Lawson, I'll handle it myself." That evening, Clara toured the house, snapping photos of the bright living room, the blooming garden, the Victorian's charm. "The market's hot," she said, handing Margaret a clipboard. "You'll get offers fast." Margaret signed the listing, the pen scratched louder than any words she'd spoken to Sophie. By morning, the listing was live. Photos of the house, its oak banister, sunlit garden, sparkled online. Offers poured in. By noon, Clara had 3 strong bids. By sunset, Margaret chose a cash offer from Diana, a divorcee seeking a fresh start. A courier delivered the eviction notice to Sophie. Vacate in 7 days. Margaret's name stood bold on the sender line. Not Mom, but Margaret Lawson, owner. Sophie's voicemails flooded in, her voice tight with panic. Mom, you can't sell our house. We live here. Please call back. Margaret silenced her phone, sipping tea in her motel room as the city lights flickered outside. Neighbors noticed the shift. Cars slowed by the lawn, sprinklers hissing as whispers spread, "She's being evicted." Squatting, they say. Sophie, in oversized sunglasses and bright lipstick, tried to carry herself with pride, but her swollen eyes betrayed her. When movers arrived, she stood at the curb with 2 suitcases. Andrew leaned against his car, arms crossed. "I'm going to my mother's," he said, driving off. Sophie sank to the curb, clutching her phone, alone. That night, Sophie buzzed Margaret's new high-rise apartment, paid for with the sale. The monitor showed her face, smudged and desperate. "Mom, I'm sorry. Let me in, just for a while." Margaret stepped onto the balcony, the skyline shimmering like a sea of candles. "Don't think you can trick an old woman, especially your mother," she said, her voice calm but unyielding. She drew the curtain, shutting Sophie out. The apartment was modest but hers, a 24th-floor haven overlooking the city. On the balcony, mint plants grew, their scent evoking Daniel's love for their fragrance. Sophie's calls came relentlessly, 10, 20, 30 a day, but Margaret let them ring, unanswered. One evening, Sophie appeared again, her coat thin, hair tangled, eyes swollen. "Please, Mom, just until I figure things out," she pleaded into the intercom. Margaret watched from the balcony, the night air cool with the promise of rain. She let the silence stretch, then spoke. "You made your choice. Live with it." She closed the curtain, the hum of traffic below a reminder of her place in the world. Each morning, Margaret crushed a mint leaf, its sharp sweetness grounding her as she sipped tea. The skyline stretched endless, a canvas of possibility. She thought of the years she'd spent bending, cooking, cleaning, staying quiet to keep peace. She'd mistaken silence for weakness, but it had been a blade, sharpened by memory. Sophie's entitlement had curdled love into control, but Margaret had broken free. One afternoon, Clara visited, bringing a bottle of wine. "You did it, Mrs. Lawson," she said, raising a glass. "You took back your life." Margaret smiled, her first true smile in years. They sat on the balcony, the city alive below. A neighbor, Mrs. Chen, stopped by with a potted lavender, welcoming her to the building. Margaret invited her in, the conversation easy, unburdened by rules. Weeks later, a letter arrived, Sophie's handwriting on the envelope. Margaret opened it, expecting pleas, but found only a single line, "I didn't know how to stop." No apology, no accountability. Margaret folded it, tucking it into a drawer she rarely opened. Forgiveness, she realized, didn't mean reopening the door. It meant locking it for good. In her new home, Margaret lived deliberately. She joined a book club at the local library, her voice steady as she shared thoughts on novels. She tended her mint plants, their growth a quiet triumph. The house on Maplewood was gone, but its essence, Daniel's love, her resilience, lived in her. Silence, once her cage, was now her strength. Love demanded respect, family, kindness. Margaret had reclaimed her dignity, her life, and the peace she'd earned.